I am Ethan, and I am 28 years old. 14 years ago, my own parents threw me out into the freezing snow, choosing to believe the vicious, fabricated lies of my twin brother over my own tears. While I was begging on my knees, clinging to my father's legs, my mother looked down at me with pure disgust and said, "A violent bully like you doesn't deserve to live in our house." They humiliated me in front of the entire school, essentially stripping away my family, my college fund, and my dignity in one swift motion. But there is one thing they didn't know. The grandmother they despised took me in, and the so-called black sheep they discarded just became the CEO of the real estate media empire that currently holds the mortgage to their beloved, crumbling house. And right now, after completely abandoning me, they are blowing up my phone begging for money. Before I tell you exactly what happened, hit that like button if you believe in karma. And don't forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Now, let's go back to where this nightmare began. The television studio was uncomfortably hot, the bright overhead lighting beating down on my shoulders as I sat opposite one of the most recognized financial anchors in the country. The leather chair squeaked slightly as I shifted my weight, projecting an air of total confidence that had taken me years to construct. The interview was the culmination of a massive week for my company. We were discussing my recent promotion to CEO of a combined digital marketing and commercial real estate firm, a merger that had shocked the industry. The anchor leaned forward, clearly intrigued by the narrative of a self-made man who had built a lucrative empire without a single cent of inheritance or family backing. He asked me about the current market, and I smoothly navigated the conversation toward our new portfolio. We discussed everything from the impact of high-profile corporate litigation to the nuances of property valuation. I spoke with absolute authority, knowing millions of people were watching this broadcast live. When the floor director finally held up the cutting motion, the anchor smiled warmly, shook my hand, and praised my insight. Walking off that set, the adrenaline pumping through my veins was intoxicating. Interns handed me bottled water, producers thanked me for my time, and for a fleeting, beautiful moment, I felt untouchable. I pushed through the heavy double doors of the studio and walked out into the crisp evening air. The city lights blurred in the distance as I pulled my keys from my pocket and approached my Porsche 911 parked in the VIP lot. I slid into the driver's seat, the rich scent of leather grounding me. I pulled my phone out of my jacket pocket. It had been on silent for the past 4 hours, a necessary boundary I set for major press events. The screen illuminated the dark interior of the car. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I physically gasped. 6 missed calls, all from a contact I had not seen pop up on my screen in over a decade. The name simply read, Mom. I stared at the glowing letters, my thumb hovering entirely frozen over the glass. My initial panic thought was that someone had died. After 14 years of absolute, deafening silence, what else could possibly prompt my mother to dial my number? A sudden illness? A fatal car crash? A funeral? The rational part of my brain screamed at me to delete the notification, to block the number, to put the Porsche in drive and return to the peaceful, heavily guarded life I had painstakingly built. But the wounded 14-year-old boy still living deep inside my chest took over. The boy who just wanted his mother to look at him with a fraction of the pride she reserved for his brother. I hit call back. She answered on the first ring, almost as if she had been sitting with the phone in her hand waiting for it to light up. Ethan? Oh my goodness, Ethan, is that you? Her voice sounded exactly the same. It was high-pitched, overly sweet, and coated in that fake, sugary veneer she always utilized when she was trying to impress the neighbors at our community meetings or church gatherings. It was the voice of a woman who cared more about appearances than the actual humans living inside her home. It is me, I said, my voice tight and guarded, completely stripped of the warmth I normally offered to strangers. Is someone hurt? Why are you calling me? Hurt? Oh no, honey, no. We are all just perfectly fine. Better than fine, actually. Your father and I were just watching the local news channel in the living room. We saw your interview. Oh, Ethan, we are just bursting with absolute pride. My little boy on television. You look so handsome in that suit. Your father is right here. He wants to say hello. There was a shuffling sound over the receiver. No apology. No acknowledgement of the 14 years of dead air. No mention of the fact that the last time they saw me, I was a sobbing child being thrown into a snowbank. Just a seamless transition into playing the role of the proud parents. Then, my father's booming, authoritative voice came through the speaker. He did not ask how I was doing. He dove right in, treating me like an employee he was calling into his office. "Ethan, proud of you, son. Listen, your mother and I were talking after we saw you on the screen. We are retired now, living on a fixed income, and things are getting tight. The old house is really falling apart. The roof needs fixing, the kitchen is completely outdated, and frankly, we have zero savings left. We saw how well you are doing with all that real estate stuff. We figured, since you are making such a massive salary now, you could help us out with the renovation costs. After all, we are family. You shouldn't hesitate to share your success with your parents." I sat perfectly still in the driver's seat. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of his words washed over me like a bucket of ice water. "Family? Share my success? Are you joking?" I asked, the anger finally bubbling up through the thick layer of shock, my grip on the steering wheel tightening until my knuckles turned white. "Why are you asking me for money when you haven't spoken to me in 14 years? You threw me out on the street. You erased me from your lives. I don't owe you a single dime." I heard my father scoff, but my mother snatched the phone back immediately. "Ethan, do not be so ungrateful," she scolded, her tone shifting instantly from sweet to venomous. "We raised you. We gave you life. You have a duty to support us in our old age. It is the absolute least you can do after all the grief and the trauma you caused your brother." I hung up the phone. I did not say goodbye. I just ended the call and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. My hands were shaking so violently I had to press them flat against my thighs. The grief I caused my brother, Julian, the golden child, the mastermind behind my complete destruction. Hearing his name brought the memories crashing back with a force that knocked the wind completely out of my lungs. I closed my eyes, leaning my head back against the headrest, and suddenly, I was not a wealthy CEO anymore. I was a child again, trapped in a house where love was a currency I could never afford to earn. I thought the worst of my past was firmly buried beneath years of therapy and financial success. I was so incredibly wrong. Growing up in my household, my twin brother Julian and I were treated so differently you would logically assume we were born to completely different families. From the moment we could form sentences, my parents had firmly decided the trajectory of our respective lives. Julian was the chosen one. He was the golden child, destined for absolute greatness, Ivy League universities, and boundless celebrated success. I was the spare, the afterthought, the resident black sheep. And my primary crime? I was simply a normal, active kid. I liked playing Little League baseball, riding bikes until the streetlights came on, and making friends with the neighborhood children. I was not interested in sitting quietly in my immaculate room studying advanced calculus at age 10. My parents, however, viewed my extroverted nature as a severe, almost unforgivable character flaw. They constantly compared us, and the comparisons were mathematically designed to never be in my favor. If I got a B on a history test, I was lazy and unmotivated. If Julian got a B on the exact same test, the teacher was incompetent and the test was unfairly hard. The favoritism was not just hidden behind closed doors. It was blatantly, proudly displayed in front of our entire extended family, especially during the holidays. Every Thanksgiving dinner was a masterclass in psychological humiliation. We would all gather around the massive mahogany dining table, the air thick with the smell of roasted turkey and tension. My Aunt Beatrice, my mother's older sister and a woman who absolutely thrived on manufacturing drama, would always start the interrogation. Aunt Beatrice was a master manipulator, a woman who whispered poison into my mother's ear at every available opportunity. She had just gone through a highly publicized, nasty divorce, fighting over custody and a massive real estate settlement, and she seemed determined to project her misery onto me. I remember one specific Thanksgiving right after we turned 12. Aunt Beatrice leaned over her plate of cranberry sauce, looked right at me and sighed dramatically. "It is such a tragedy, Martha," Beatrice said to my mother. Her voice projected loudly enough for every aunt, uncle, and cousin at the table to hear clearly. "Twins are so incredibly tricky. There is always one who absorbs all the light, the talent, the potential. And then there is the other one who just casts a dark shadow. You really need to protect Julian's energy. Ethan just seems to drain it right out of him. You should watch his college fund closely, Martha. Ethan will likely squander it." My mother nodded solemnly, treating Beatrice's toxic garbage like undeniable gospel truth. I sat there, staring blankly at my mashed potatoes, feeling my face burn with a deep, consuming shame. My father did not defend me. Julian simply smirked across the table. The disparity in our treatment reached its most painful, undeniable peak on our birthdays. Being twins, we obviously shared the exact same day, but you would never know it by looking at the celebrations my parents hosted. For our 14th birthday, my parents went all out. They rented out an entire premium arcade complex for Julian. They bought him a brand new, top-of-the-line gaming console, invited 20 of his classmates, and ordered a massive custom cake from an expensive bakery with his name written in bold, gold icing. My name was scribbled at the very bottom edge of the cake in tiny, almost illegible letters, looking like a total afterthought. But here is the beautiful irony of that day. Julian, despite being paraded around like a royal prince at home, was incredibly socially awkward and genuinely unpleasant to be around. He was arrogant, entitled, and frankly mean to the kids at school. They did not like him. So, when the day of the huge, expensive arcade party arrived, a grand total of 2 kids showed up for him. They ate his cake in awkward silence and left early. Meanwhile, my parents had explicitly told me I was not allowed to invite anyone to the arcade because it was Julian's special day. But my friends, knowing exactly how my family treated me, had pooled their meager allowances together. After the disastrous arcade party ended, my friends met me at the local public park. They bought me cheap ice cream from a truck, gave me hilarious handmade cards, and we spent hours laughing, playing basketball, and just being kids. It was the best birthday I had ever experienced. When Julian found out that I had a genuinely great time while his expensive, catered party was a total flop, something dark and dangerous inside him finally snapped. The jealousy that had always simmered beneath his pristine surface boiled over into a consuming hatred. He resented that I could talk to people effortlessly. He hated that people genuinely liked me for who I was. And he decided that if he could not have friends, he would make absolutely sure I did not have any either. The retaliation started slowly, almost imperceptibly. Julian began lying. If he broke a valuable vase in the living room, he would tell my parents I threw a baseball in the house. If he stole a $20 bill from my mother's purse, he would carefully hide the empty wallet under my mattress. And my parents, already primed by Aunt Beatrice to believe I was a delinquent destined for failure, swallowed his lies without a single question or investigation. They began punishing me fiercely for things I never did. They grounded me from baseball practice. They barred me from attending school dances or hanging out at the mall. It felt like walking on a floor covered in eggshells in my own home, holding my breath and waiting for the next baseless accusation to drop and shatter my peace. The breaking point arrived during our sophomore year of high school. I had downloaded Snapchat on my phone. Every single teenager in America had Snapchat. It was just how we communicated, how we shared jokes, how we existed socially. But my parents had strict, draconian rules against social media. Julian, operating like a seasoned spy, snooped through my phone while I was in the shower. He took a screenshot of the app and ran straight to my father, presenting it like highly classified evidence of a major crime. My parents went completely unhinged. My father marched into my bedroom, his face purple with absolute rage. He did not ask for an explanation. He did not yell. He just started destroying my sanctuary. He ripped my posters off the walls, tearing the paper into shreds. He took my phone, the one I had bought with my own summer job money, and smashed it repeatedly against the sharp edge of my desk until the glass shattered into 100 pieces. Then he walked out to the garage, grabbed a power drill, and literally took my bedroom door off its hinges. "You have absolutely no right to privacy in this house." My father spat at me, carrying the heavy wooden door down the hallway. "You are a liar and a sneak. You will live completely exposed until you learn to behave like your brother." Julian stood in the hallway, leaning against the wall, watching the entire violent scene unfold. When my father walked past him carrying the door, Julian looked right at me. A cold, deeply calculated smile spread across his face. He was testing the waters. He was realizing just how much absolute power he held over my parents, and by extension, over my entire existence. The emotional abuse escalated daily after the door was removed. I dreaded going home. The only sliver of light in my dark life was my grandmother Eleanor. She was my father's mother, a tough, fiercely independent woman who saw right through my parents' ridiculous facade. She refused to play their games. Whenever she visited, she would sneak me my favorite chocolate bars and slip a $20 bill into my pocket when no one was looking. "Do not let them break your spirit, Ethan," she would whisper fiercely, holding my face in her warm, wrinkled hands. "You have a good heart. Your brother is sick with envy, and your parents are blind fools. But you are strong. You will survive them." I held onto her words like a life preserver in a raging ocean. But even Grandma Eleanor could not protect me from the catastrophic storm Julian was brewing at school. He realized that torturing me at home was no longer enough to satisfy his jealousy. He wanted to destroy my reputation outside those walls. He wanted to take away the only thing I had left in the world: my friends. I started noticing the subtle shift in the school hallways first. People who usually high-fived me between classes suddenly kept their heads down. Invitations to hang out on the weekends completely stopped. Whispers followed me into the cafeteria, trailing behind me like a foul stench. I felt like I was slowly losing my mind, entirely isolated in a building packed with hundreds of people. I finally cornered my best friend, Derek, by his locker after gym class. We had been inseparable since the 2nd grade. I begged him to tell me what was going on, why everyone was looking at me like I was radioactive. Derek would not even look me in the eye. "Just stay away from me, Ethan," Derek muttered, slamming his metal locker shut with a loud bang. "I know exactly what you are doing to Julian. He told us everything. He showed us the bruises. You are a complete psycho." My blood ran cold. Bruises? What bruises? I thought the nightmare was contained firmly to the walls of my home. I was entirely unprepared for the sheer scale of the destruction my brother had unleashed upon my life. The accusation felt like a physical blow to the stomach, knocking the air straight out of my lungs. Derek walked away down the crowded corridor, leaving me completely paralyzed in front of the locker banks. My mind raced at 1,000,000 miles an hour, desperately trying to piece together the terrifying fragments of this absurd puzzle. Bruises? Julian was claiming I beat him up? I spent the rest of that day in a state of absolute, suffocating panic. I skipped my afternoon classes and started watching Julian from a distance, hiding behind stairwells and cafeteria pillars. The next morning, I saw exactly what Derek was talking about. Julian walked into the school cafeteria. His head hung low in a perfect display of manufactured sorrow. He was wearing a short-sleeved polo shirt despite the chilly autumn weather. On his upper left arm was a massive, dark purple bruise, the edges yellowing slightly. Later that week, he showed up to chemistry class with a swollen lower lip and a faint, unmistakable black eye. Whenever a teacher, a counselor, or a concerned student asked him what happened, he would flinch dramatically. He would put on a terrified, wide-eyed expression and whisper that he fell down the wooden stairs at home, or that he was just playing too rough at a pickup football game. But he made absolutely sure to say it in a trembling tone that heavily implied he was terrified and covering for someone dangerous. He played the battered, terrified victim with the terrifying precision of a seasoned psychopath. He was doing this to himself. He was purposefully inflicting severe injuries on his own body. He was punching his own face, throwing his own body against hard surfaces, enduring physical pain just to carefully frame me. I confronted him that Friday afternoon in the empty school parking lot. I ran up behind him, grabbed him fiercely by the strap of his expensive backpack, and spun him around to face me. "What are you doing?" I demanded, my voice trembling violently with a mixture of profound fear and explosive rage. "Julian, you need to tell them the truth right now. Stop doing this to yourself. Stop telling people I am hurting you." Julian did not look scared. He did not flinch. He looked around the empty asphalt to make absolutely sure no one was watching us. And then that same cold, deeply calculated smirk spread across his bruised, swollen face. "Why would I ever do that?" he whispered, stepping closer to me until I could smell the mint gum on his breath. "Everyone loves a victim, Ethan. And everyone already firmly believes you are the bad guy at home. It is so incredibly easy to make them believe you are a violent monster here, too. You deserve to rot alone, just like I did on my birthday." He violently ripped his backpack from my grip, turned his back on me, and walked to my parents' waiting car, leaving me standing alone in the freezing wind. The rumor mill spun entirely out of control over the weekend. It was no longer just idle teenage gossip in the cafeteria. It was actively shaping how the entire community perceived me. Concerned parents were calling the school board. Teachers looked at me with open, unmasked disgust during lectures. I desperately wanted to tell my parents the truth, to beg them to intervene, but I knew with absolute, heartbreaking certainty that they would side with Julian. They always did. The bomb finally detonated on a rainy Tuesday morning. A stern voice came over the classroom intercom, instructing me to report to Principal Higgins' office immediately. The walk down the long hallway felt like a march to the executioner's block. When I pushed open the heavy oak door to the office, my heart sank entirely into my shoes. My mother was already sitting in one of the leather guest chairs, dabbing her eyes dramatically with a crumpled tissue. My father stood firmly behind her, his posture rigid with fury, glaring at me like I was a stranger who had broken into his home. Julian sat in the far corner, shrinking into a chair, looking incredibly small and fragile, sporting a fresh, ugly red bruise on his cheekbone. Principal Higgins sat securely behind his massive mahogany desk, his hands folded, looking at me like I was a convicted felon. "Take a seat, Ethan," Higgins said, his voice entirely devoid of warmth. The next hour was the most profoundly traumatizing experience of my entire life. Principal Higgins laid out the horrific accusations methodically. He stated that multiple students had come forward, reporting that I was physically abusing my twin brother out of deep-seated jealousy over his academic success. He pointed directly to Julian's bruised face as undeniable proof. "Is this true, Julian?" Higgins asked gently, his tone softening entirely for my brother. "Did Ethan do this to you?" Julian let out a fake, trembling sob that echoed in the quiet room. He nodded slowly, refusing to look in my direction. "Yes," he whispered, his voice cracking perfectly. "He hits me when Mom and Dad aren't home. He says it's because they love me more. I'm so scared of him, Principal Higgins. I can't sleep." "Liar!" I screamed, jumping out of my chair, unable to contain the absolute injustice of it all. "He is lying. He hits himself. He told me to my face he was doing it to ruin my life. Mom, Dad, you have to believe me. I have never laid a single finger on him." My father lunged forward instantly. He grabbed me violently by the shoulders and shoved me back into the chair with such force my teeth rattled against each other. "Do not you dare raise your voice to your mother, you absolute animal," he roared, spit flying from his lips. "We have suspected this dark behavior for months. The lying, the sneaking around, the aggression. You are completely out of control." My mother was sobbing hysterically now, reaching over to hold Julian's hand tightly. "We tried so hard with him, Principal Higgins. We gave him everything a child could want. I just don't understand where this inherent darkness comes from." I looked at the three of them, my family. The people who were biologically supposed to protect me were actively acting as my judge, jury, and executioners based entirely on the word of a deeply disturbed, jealous teenager. "Principal Higgins, please," I begged, tears finally spilling over my cheeks, dropping onto my shirt. "Look at my disciplinary record. I do not have a single violent incident in 10 years. Check the security cameras. Ask Officer Davis, the school resource officer. He saw Julian trip on purpose last week. Please, just do a real investigation." Higgins shook his head, his face a hardened mask of stern disapproval. "The school has a strict, unwavering zero-tolerance policy for bullying and violence, Ethan, especially domestic violence that bleeds into our safe school environment. You are suspended for 10 days, effective immediately, and we will be evaluating your permanent enrollment status during that time." My parents did not say another word to me or the principal. My father grabbed me roughly by the back of my jacket, hauled me to my feet, and practically dragged me out of the office. He marched me through the crowded front lobby, past the staring faces of my former peers, and out to the car. The drive home was perfectly, terrifyingly silent. It was a suffocating silence that pressed against my eardrums. When we walked through the front door of our house, my father did not hesitate for a second. He marched straight up the hardwood stairs. I heard the loud sound of dresser drawers being ripped open. A few minutes later, he came back down, dragging a large, black canvas suitcase behind him. He threw it down the stairs. It hit the foyer floor with a heavy, sickening thud, bursting open and spilling my jeans, shirts, and socks across the polished wood. "Get your things?" my father said, his voice deadly calm, a stark contrast to his earlier yelling. "Dad, what are you doing?" I choked out, dropping to my knees on the floor to try and gather my scattered clothes. "You are no longer welcome in this house," he stated, staring down at me with eyes entirely devoid of any love, warmth, or recognition. "I will not have a violent predator sleeping under the same roof as my wife and my son. You are going to pack this bag, and you are going to get out." I started sobbing uncontrollably, the panic seizing my chest. I grabbed his pant leg, begging him, pleading with him. "Dad, please. I am 14 years old. Where am I supposed to go? It is freezing outside. Mom, tell him. Please, Mom. Say something." My mother stood at the top of the stairs, her arms wrapped tightly, protectively around Julian. She looked down at me, her face contorted with disgust, and delivered the line that would vividly haunt my nightmares for the next decade. "A violent bully like you doesn't deserve to live in our house. Call your grandmother. If she wants to deal with a delinquent, she can come get you. But as of right now, you are dead to us." My father grabbed me aggressively by the collar of my shirt, hauled me to my feet, and shoved me forcefully out the front door. He threw my broken suitcase out onto the porch after me. The heavy wooden door slammed shut, and I heard the loud, definitive click of the deadbolt sliding into place. I sat on the freezing concrete porch for 2 hours, the winter snow biting at my skin. I was shivering violently, clutching my flimsy jacket tightly around my chest. I used my battered, cracked cell phone to call Grandma Eleanor. I could barely speak through my hyperventilating sobs. She arrived 20 minutes later, her old Buick skidding dangerously into the snowy driveway. When she saw me sitting in the snow surrounded by my clothes, she let out a guttural sound of pure, unadulterated fury. She did not hug me right away. She marched right past me, stomped up the porch steps, and began pounding on the front door with her fists like a battering ram. When my father opened the door, looking annoyed and arrogant, Grandma Eleanor unleashed hell. "You pathetic excuse for a father," she screamed, pointing a shaking, furious finger directly in his face. "You throw your own flesh and blood into the freezing snow based on the lies of a jealous boy? You blind, arrogant fool. Mother, keep your voice down," my father hissed, looking around nervously at the neighboring houses, terrified of a public scandal. "You don't know what he did. He is violent. The only violence I see is the emotional butchery you and your idiotic wife have inflicted on this child for 14 years. She roared back, stepping closer to him. "I am taking him, And hear me clearly, Arthur. If you ever try to contact him again, if you ever try to claim him on your taxes, or if you ever try to step foot near my property, I will file a massive lawsuit. I will call Child Protective Services and demand full custody. I will have you thrown in a jail cell for child abandonment. Do you understand me? My father looked entirely stunned. My mother cowered behind him in the hallway shadows. Grandma Eleanor did not wait for a response. She turned around, gathered my scattered things with gentle hands, and helped me into the warm passenger seat of her car. As we drove away, leaving behind the only home I had ever known, I looked back at the house through the rearview mirror. I saw Julian standing in the large living room window, watching me leave. The terrified victim act was gone. In its place was a look of cold, victorious satisfaction. He had won. He had completely destroyed me, or so he thought. The 10 days of my school suspension felt like an absolute eternity. Living with Grandma Eleanor was the single tether that kept me from entirely losing my mind to the grief. Her small, modest house smelled wonderfully of cinnamon, old paperbacks, and safety. A stark, beautiful contrast to the sterile, tense museum of a house I had grown up in. She made me hot, homemade meals, listened to me cry until my throat was raw and bleeding, and constantly reminded me that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, eventually finds its way to the surface. But returning to high school after the suspension was lifted was exactly like walking straight into a lion's den wearing a suit made of raw meat. I was officially a complete outcast. The brand of violent abuser was permanently stamped onto my forehead, invisible to my own eyes but glaringly obvious to everyone else in the building. The teachers treated me with cold, calculated suspicion, constantly monitoring my movements in the hallways. The students simply acted like I did not exist, a ghost haunting the lockers. I ate my lunch alone in the quietest corner of the library every single day. I walked the corridors with my head down, staring at the scuff marks on the linoleum. I had absolutely no friends, no social life, and no family outside of my grandmother. But in that crushing, overwhelming loneliness, a strange and powerful thing began to happen. The constant, exhausting noise of trying to please my unpleasable parents, the endless fatigue of trying to compete with Julian. It all vanished. I had absolutely nothing left to lose, which meant I had all the time and focus in the world to dedicate entirely to myself. I threw myself violently into my studies. If they were going to universally label me a monster, I was going to be the smartest, most academically successful monster that school district had ever seen. I read voraciously. I studied until my eyes blurred. I graduated high school with top honors, near the very top of my class. My parents did not attend the graduation ceremony. Julian was there, surrounded by his fake, sycophantic friends, glaring at me with deep resentment as I walked confidently across the stage to receive my diploma. I did not even look his way. He was already a ghost to me. College was my true ultimate escape. I moved 3 states away to a university where nobody knew my name. I utilized a complex mix of academic scholarships, grants, and federal student loans to pay my way, since my parents had completely drained the college fund they had supposedly set up for me. Giving every last penny to Julian, I logically assumed. For the first time in my entire life, I tasted absolute, unadulterated freedom. Nobody knew my face. Nobody knew the horrific rumors. I was just Ethan. During my sophomore year, looking to fulfill a humanities credit, I took an elective creative writing class with Professor Henderson. He was a notoriously tough, no-nonsense academic who rarely handed out compliments. After reading my final term essay, a thinly veiled, deeply emotional narrative about surviving severe family trauma and the psychology of scapegoating, he called me into his cramped office. "You have a profound gift, Ethan," Professor Henderson told me, tapping his pen against my graded paper. "You know exactly how to manipulate emotion through words. You understand narrative structure on an instinctual level. Do not waste this talent on writing academic essays for professors like me. Learn how to write for the real world. Learn copywriting. Learn digital marketing. That is where the power is." That single conversation permanently changed the trajectory of my life. I did not want to just be a struggling, starving writer. I wanted to be financially bulletproof. I wanted to build a fortress of wealth and influence so incredibly strong that nobody could ever throw me out into the cold again. I started a freelance writing business from my tiny, cramped dorm room. I wrote blog posts, e-commerce product descriptions, and persuasive ad copy. I worked relentlessly until 3 a.m. every single night, surviving on cheap ramen noodles and terrible instant coffee. Slowly but surely, my client base grew. I started charging higher rates. By the time I walked across the stage to graduate college, I did not need to desperately look for a corporate entry-level job. I had already built a highly profitable digital marketing agency. Over the next few years, I leaned heavily into the lucrative real estate sector. I realized quickly that commercial real estate agents and massive property developers desperately needed compelling, emotional narratives to sell their multi-million-dollar listings. I combined my raw storytelling skills with aggressive, data-driven digital marketing tactics. My agency exploded in revenue. I started hiring staff, expanding into high-end media production, and eventually taking the massive leap to invest heavily in the very real estate projects we were successfully marketing. I was completely, undeniably financially independent. I bought Grandma Eleanor a beautiful, fully accessible cottage with a sprawling botanical garden, paying for it entirely in cash. I traveled the world as a wealthy digital nomad, closing massive deals from coffee shops in Rome and high-rises in Tokyo. I was actively healing. The childhood scars were still there, but they no longer dictated my future. And then, 5 years ago, the universe delivered a strange, unexpected piece of closure. I was sitting in a high-end coffee shop in downtown Chicago, preparing for a meeting with a new client, when a woman cautiously approached my table. She looked familiar, but it took me a moment to place her. It was Chloe. She had dated Julian briefly during our senior year of high school. She looked incredibly nervous, wringing her hands together. "Ethan? I don't know if you remember me." "I remember you, Chloe," I said calmly, gesturing for her to sit. She sat down, genuine tears instantly welling up in her eyes. "I need to apologize to you. It has been eating me alive for years. I have been holding on to this secret, and I can't do it anymore. Back in high school, when Julian was showing everyone those horrible bruises, I went over to your house one day after school to surprise him. The front door was unlocked. I walked quietly up the stairs to his bedroom, and the door was cracked open. My breath hitched in my throat. I stayed perfectly still, maintaining eye contact. I saw him, Ethan," Chloe whispered, her voice breaking with guilt. "I saw Julian standing in front of his full-length mirror. He had a heavy, hardback history textbook in his hand, and he was violently slamming it into his own shoulder. Over and over again. He was doing it to himself. I was so terrified of what he was doing, I just backed away and ran out of the house. I never told anyone because I was genuinely scared of what a psychopath like that would do to me if I exposed him. I am so incredibly sorry I let everyone think you were the bad guy." Hearing that verbal validation after all those long, agonizing years felt like a heavy steel chain snapping off my chest. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just nodded slowly, thanked her sincerely for finally telling me the truth, paid for her coffee, and walked away. I didn't need to run back and expose Julian anymore. I didn't need my parents' validation or their apologies. I had my own incredible life. My business continued to skyrocket over the next 5 years. We executed a massive, highly publicized corporate merger, and my agency seamlessly transitioned into a full-scale commercial real estate investment and media conglomerate. My net worth climbed rapidly into numbers I used to think were entirely fictional, and that undeniable success led directly to the television interview. The very interview that my parents happened to watch from their living room. Standing on the cold sidewalk next to my Porsche, holding my phone after hanging up on my mother's demands for a salary handout, the pieces began to click rapidly into place. They wanted money. They thought I was just some successful freelancer with a decent salary. They thought they could guilt-trip me into writing a fat check for their home renovations. They had absolutely no idea the terrifying level of financial power I now wielded. They had no idea that my investment firm had recently purchased a massive, multi-million-dollar portfolio of distressed residential debt from a struggling regional bank. I opened my phone, bypassed the security protocols, logged into my secure company server, and searched the database for the exact address of my childhood home, the house they had kicked me out of. When the legal file loaded on my screen, a slow, incredibly dark smile spread across my face. Julian, the brilliant golden boy, had apparently tried his hand at a tech business and failed miserably. To cover his massive losses and avoid a lawsuit, he had convinced my parents to take out a massive second mortgage on their house to fund his sinking ship. The house was heavily in default. It was slated for immediate foreclosure. And my company, as of 2 short weeks ago, was the legal entity that owned every single cent of that debt. I thought the storm of my past had finally passed. But looking at that binding legal document, I realized something profound. I was not going to hide from the storm anymore. I was going to become the hurricane. The grand ballroom of the downtown Ritz-Carlton was practically humming with the quiet, expensive energy of corporate triumph. My firm was hosting our annual charity gala, a massive event that doubled as a victory lap for our latest, highly aggressive real estate acquisition. The room was bathed in warm, amber light, reflecting off the crystal chandeliers and the rim of champagne flutes. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the valet line bustling with activity, carefully parking a steady stream of Ferraris, sleek Lamborghinis, and heavy, imposing Rolls-Royces. I stood near the center of the room, dressed in a custom-tailored Tom Ford suit, holding a glass of sparkling water. I was currently deep in conversation with Marcus, a 70-year-old billionaire property developer who had become my most trusted business partner and, in many ways, the father figure I never actually had. We were discussing the intricate details of a massive commercial zoning project when my head of security, a towering former Marine named David, quietly approached my side. He leaned in, his voice barely a low rumble over the smooth jazz playing in the background. "Sir, I apologize for the interruption," David said, his face a mask of absolute professionalism. "We have a situation at the front reception desk. 3 individuals are demanding entry. They do not have invitations, and they are not on the guest list. However, they are aggressively claiming to be your immediate family. A Mr. and Mrs. Arthur, and a younger man they say is your twin brother." The name hit my chest like a physical blow, temporarily stopping the breath in my lungs. Marcus, sharp as a tack despite his age, noticed the immediate shift in my posture. He raised a silver eyebrow, taking a slow sip of his bourbon. My parents, and Julian, they had actually shown up. After the phone call a week ago, I had ignored their subsequent texts and voicemails. I assumed they would eventually give up and look for an easier target to scam. I drastically underestimated their sheer, unadulterated entitlement. They had somehow tracked down the location of my company's public gala and decided to ambush me in a room full of my wealthiest investors. They thought they could corner me. They thought my desire to maintain a pristine public image would force me to quietly hand them a check to make them go away. A cold, absolute calm suddenly washed over my entire body. I looked at David. "Bring them into the private VIP lounge down the hall. Do not let them into the main ballroom. I will meet them there in 5 minutes. I can have them escorted off the property entirely, Ethan," Marcus offered quietly, his tone protective. He knew fragments of my past, enough to know these people were incredibly toxic. "You do not have to deal with this tonight. You just secured the biggest promotion of your career. Do not let them ruin your evening." "No," I replied, setting my glass down on a passing waiter's tray. "I want to see them, Marcus. Actually, I would greatly appreciate it if you came with me. I have a distinct feeling I am going to need an objective witness to this specific conversation." Marcus nodded slowly, his eyes hardening. "Lead the way." We walked down the long, heavily carpeted corridor away from the loud music and laughter of the main event. When David pushed open the heavy mahogany doors to the private lounge, I stepped inside. There they were, The people who had actively destroyed my childhood and thrown me into the freezing snow 14 years ago. Time had not been kind to my parents. My father, who used to walk with the arrogant posture of a king, now looked shrunken and incredibly tired. His suit was severely outdated, hanging loosely on his frame. My mother, who always prided herself on looking like a wealthy country club wife, was wearing a dress that looked like it had been pulled from the back of a dusty closet. The stress of their secret financial ruin had clearly aged them a decade beyond their actual years. And then there was Julian, the golden child. He stood slightly behind our mother, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He was wearing an ill-fitting blazer, his hairline prematurely receding, his face carrying a permanent scowl of bitter resentment. He looked absolutely nothing like the brilliant, successful prodigy my parents had proudly promised the world he would become. He looked like a man who had failed at every single endeavor he ever attempted. When they saw me walk through the doors, my mother's face instantly broke into a wide, entirely terrifying smile. It was the exact same fake, sugary smile she used to flash at the neighborhood barbecues right before she would go inside and scream at me for breathing too loudly. "Ethan, oh my beautiful boy," she cried out, taking a dramatic step forward with her arms wide open, completely ignoring the fact that David stepped smoothly between us to block her path. She stopped, looking offended, but quickly recovered. "We are just so incredibly proud of you. We saw the articles online about this big party. We just had to come and celebrate our son's amazing success in the real estate world." I did not smile. I did not move. I just stared at her, letting the heavy, uncomfortable silence stretch out until the air in the room felt thick enough to cut with a knife. My father cleared his throat nervously, attempting to assert his old, domineering authority. "Ethan, tell your security guard to stand down. We are your family. We came a long way to see you tonight. You came a long way to corner me because I stopped answering your phone calls." I corrected him, my voice dangerously flat and entirely devoid of emotion. "And you are not my family. My family consists of the people who did not throw me out like garbage when I was 14 years old. You are just 3 strangers standing in my private lounge." "Who invited you?" Julian finally spoke up, a nasty, arrogant sneer twisting his lips. "We don't need an invitation, bro. You are making millions of dollars now. You're the CEO. You think you can just hide in your fancy ivory tower while your own flesh and blood struggles? That's pathetic. You owe mom and dad." "I owe them absolutely nothing," I shot back, locking eyes with my brother. "They burned through my college fund to pay for your massive, embarrassing failures. And now you expect me to clean up the mess." My father's face flushed a deep, angry red. "Listen to me very carefully, Ethan. We are living on a fixed income. The house is literally falling apart around us. We know exactly how much your agency makes. We know about your massive salary and your recent promotion. We are not asking for the world. We are simply asking for our rightful share. Think of it as an early withdrawal on your inheritance." I actually laughed out loud. It was a harsh, bitter sound that echoed off the lounge walls. "Inheritance? Are you absolutely out of your mind? You have 0 inheritance to leave behind. You are completely, undeniably broke." My mother gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. "How dare you speak to your father that way in front of a stranger?" She glared intensely at Marcus, who was leaning casually against the doorframe, watching the entire exchange with cold, calculating eyes. "This stranger is my senior partner, Marcus," I said smoothly. "He is fully aware of exactly who you people are and exactly what you did to me, so you can completely drop the loving, concerned parent act. It is insulting to my intelligence." My father took a menacing step forward, pointing a shaking finger at my chest. The old, violent temper that used to terrify me as a child was rapidly bubbling to the surface. "You listen to me, you ungrateful little brat. I am your father. I put a roof over your head for 14 years. You are legally and morally obligated to help us. If you do not write us a check to fix that house tonight, I will go straight out to that ballroom and I will tell every single one of your wealthy, snobby investors exactly what kind of monster you really are. I will tell them about your violent past. I will tell them how you brutally abused your own brother. There it was, the ultimate trap, the exact same psychological warfare they had utilized to destroy my life in high school. They genuinely thought I was still that terrified, helpless 14-year-old boy. They thought the threat of a public scandal, the threat of their fabricated rumors, would force me to instantly surrender and open my wallet. They thought they still held all the absolute power in this dynamic. I looked at my father's desperate, angry face. I looked at my mother's fake, manipulative tears. I looked at Julian's incredibly arrogant, entitled smirk. They were so completely, utterly clueless about the reality of the situation they had just walked blindly into. They thought they had backed me into a corner. They had absolutely no idea that I had spent the last 2 weeks carefully building a steel cage around them. "You want to talk about the house, Arthur?" I asked, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet whisper. "Okay, let's talk about the house." I turned slightly and signaled to David. My security chief reached into his breast pocket, pulled out a thick, legal-sized envelope, and handed it directly to me. The heavy, unbleached paper felt incredibly solid in my hands. I walked over to the sleek, black glass coffee table in the center of the lounge and tossed the envelope onto it. It landed with a heavy, definitive smack. "Go ahead," I said, gesturing toward the table with an open palm. "Open it. Since we are having a completely transparent family meeting about your finances, you should probably look at those documents." My father stared at the envelope suspiciously, as if it were a live explosive. He looked at my mother, who simply wrung her hands nervously. Finally, Julian, impatient and arrogant as always, pushed past his parents, snatched the envelope off the glass, and ripped the top open. He pulled out the thick stack of legal papers, his eyes rapidly scanning the dense, heavily formatted text. For the first 10 seconds, Julian's face retained its usual mocking sneer. But as he read further down the first page, the blood completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost. His hands started to visibly tremble, the paper rattling loudly in the quiet room. He flipped to the second page, then the third, his breathing becoming shallow and panicked. "What is it, Julian?" my father demanded, stepping forward to read over his shoulder. "What does it say?" My father put on his reading glasses. I watched his eyes track across the bold legal headers. I watched the exact moment his brain fully comprehended the catastrophic reality of the words printed on the page. His jaw physically dropped. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with absolute, unadulterated horror. This is a notice of absolute foreclosure," my father stammered, his voice entirely devoid of its previous aggressive thunder, and a demand for immediate payment in full. "But the bank said we had another 30 days to renegotiate the terms." "You did have 30 days with your regional community bank," I explained, my voice as cold and hard as a glacier. "But your bank was struggling with liquidity. They decided to offload a massive bundle of their high-risk, distressed residential debt to private equity firms to clear their books. My commercial real estate firm aggressively purchased that exact portfolio last week. Which means, legally speaking, your friendly neighborhood bank no longer owns the heavy second mortgage on your house." I took a slow, deliberate step forward, closing the physical distance between us until I was standing right in front of my father. "I own it," I stated clearly. "I am your sole creditor. And as the CEO of the firm holding your heavily defaulted paper, I have absolutely zero interest in renegotiating a single term with people who have zero verifiable income and a massive history of financial irresponsibility. You are over 90 days delinquent. The grace period is officially over." My mother let out a sharp, hysterical shriek. "What are you talking about? Ethan, you can't do this. That is our family home. We raised you in that house." "You raised Julian in that house?" I corrected her sharply, pointing a finger directly at my brother, who was currently staring at the floor, completely paralyzed by shock. You threw me out of that house into the snow when I was a child. And ironically, the only reason you are losing that precious house now is because of your brilliant, flawless golden child. I turned my attention entirely to Julian. I wanted him to feel the full, crushing weight of his monumental failures. Let's be completely honest for once in our lives, I said, my voice echoing in the lounge. Dad didn't retire early. He was forced out. And you didn't just fall behind on some minor kitchen repair bills. Julian convinced you to take out a massive, reckless second mortgage on your fully paid-off home to fund his idiotic tech startup. A startup that failed miserably because Julian has absolutely zero work ethic and zero talent. He was facing a massive lawsuit from his initial investors for gross negligence. And you drained every last penny of your savings to pay his legal fees to keep him out of federal prison. You sacrificed your absolute entire financial future to protect a liar. And now the bill is finally due. My father looked like he was going to vomit. His hands were shaking uncontrollably. Ethan, please, son. We didn't know. The lawyer told us we could protect the asset if we transferred the deed. We are completely bankrupt. If you foreclose on this property, we will be homeless. We have nowhere to go. You cannot put your own parents on the street. You did it to me, I replied, my voice completely devoid of any sympathy. You looked me right in the eye while I begged for my life, and you locked the deadbolt. You told me a violent monster didn't deserve to live in your house. Well, Arthur, a toxic, manipulative parasite doesn't deserve to live in mine. Because technically, that house belongs entirely to my firm now. My mother rushed forward, tears streaming down her face, ruining her cheap makeup. She reached out to grab my arm, but I took a sharp step back, refusing to let her touch me. Ethan, I am begging you, she sobbed, falling to her knees on the expensive carpet. I am your mother. I carried you. Please, just forgive the debt. You are so wealthy you don't need this money. Please, have mercy on us. I looked down at her, the woman who had allowed me to be emotionally tortured for 14 years. The woman who had actively participated in my destruction. Seeing her on her knees, begging for the exact same mercy she had coldly denied me, was the most profoundly surreal moment of my entire life. I am a reasonable businessman, I said slowly, letting the silence stretch before I delivered my final blow. I will completely wipe the debt clean. I will sign the deed over to you free and clear. You will never have to pay me a single dime, and you can keep your precious house until the day you die. My father's head snapped up, a desperate, pathetic glimmer of hope igniting in his eyes. Julian finally looked up from the floor. On one strict, non-negotiable condition, I continued. Anything, my father gasped out quickly. Name it, Ethan. Anything. I looked directly at Julian. His eyes widened in absolute panic. He knew exactly what was coming. You want the house? I asked, my voice deadly serious. Then tomorrow morning you are going to invite Aunt Beatrice, Uncle Robert, and every single member of our extended family to your living room. And right in front of them, Julian is going to get down on his knees, and he is going to publicly confess to every single lie he told 14 years ago. He is going to admit that he purposefully bruised himself. He is going to admit that he framed me because he was a jealous, pathetic coward. And then, Mom and Dad, you are going to look me in the eye in front of everyone, and you are going to loudly apologize for being absolute failures as parents. The silence in the lounge was deafening. You could hear a pin drop on the thick carpet. Julian reacted first, his face contorted with absolute rage and terror. No, absolutely not. I am not doing that. You are completely insane if you think I am going to humiliate myself in front of the whole family for you. You already humiliated yourself by bankrupting our parents, Julian, I yelled, finally letting my anger crack through my composed facade. You have been hiding behind their protection your entire pathetic life. Now is your chance to actually save them. Confess the truth, or you all sleep in a shelter next month. The choice is entirely yours. My father looked at Julian, desperation written all over his aged face. Julian, son, please, we have to do this. We have no other options. We will lose everything. I said no. Julian screamed, backing away toward the door like a cornered animal. I am not going to let him ruin my reputation. I won't do it. Mom, tell him. Tell him I shouldn't have to do this. My mother looked back and forth between her golden child and the absolute ruin facing her. For the first time in her life, the illusion of her perfect family was completely shattered. She realized that Julian cared more about his fragile, fake ego than he cared about his parents having a roof over their heads. She just buried her face in her hands and sobbed uncontrollably. I looked at the three of them, a feeling of deep, profound disgust settling in my stomach. They couldn't do it. Even faced with complete financial annihilation, they still could not bring themselves to hold Julian accountable for his actions. They would rather go down with the sinking ship than admit they were wrong about me. That is exactly what I thought, I said quietly, gesturing to David. David, please escort these people off the premises immediately. If they ever step foot near my office or my events again, call the police and have them arrested for criminal trespassing. As David physically guided my screaming father and sobbing mother out the door, Julian turned back to look at me one last time. The absolute hatred in his eyes was palpable. But underneath the hatred, I saw something else. I saw pure, unadulterated fear. He knew the game was finally over. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far, you're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. 3 days passed in absolute, blissful silence. I completely threw myself back into my work, finalizing the details of our new real estate acquisitions and preparing my executive team for the upcoming quarter. I honestly thought that my brutal ultimatum at the charity gala had finally severed the rotten cord connecting me to my toxic past. I assumed my parents and Julian were busy frantically packing their belongings into cardboard boxes, preparing for the inevitable eviction. But a narcissist never truly knows when to surrender. They always believe they can manipulate the narrative one last time. It was a quiet Thursday evening. I was sitting in the spacious, modern living room of my penthouse apartment, reviewing a commercial lease agreement, when my personal cell phone vibrated sharply on the glass coffee table. I picked it up, expecting a message from Marcus or my assistant. Instead, it was a long, rambling text message from an unknown number. But the incredibly arrogant, entitled tone was instantly recognizable. It was Julian. Hey bro, it's Julian. Listen, things got a little heated the other night at your party. But we need to talk like rational adults. Mom is having panic attacks and Dad's blood pressure is through the roof. You are literally killing them with this ridiculous foreclosure threat. I admit that I did lie about you 14 years ago with the bruises and the bullying stuff. But honestly, it has been a really long time since then, so you need to stop being so deeply selfish and just try to move on from the past. Holding on to a grudge is toxic. You are a millionaire now. You are unmarried and childless anyway, so it's not like you have a family to support. Why do you violently refuse to help your own flesh and blood out by paying off this debt? Do the right thing, Ethan. Be a better son and drop the foreclosure. Let's just put this behind us. I sat perfectly still on my expensive leather sofa, reading the text message 3 times to ensure my brain was properly processing the sheer, unfathomable audacity radiating from the screen. He admitted it, in black and white. He casually confessed to purposefully destroying my entire childhood, framing me for domestic violence, and getting me violently thrown out onto the freezing streets. And in the exact same breath, he had the absolute nerve to call me selfish for not handing over hundreds of thousands of dollars to save him from the consequences of his own catastrophic financial failures. He used my unmarried status as a weapon to guilt-trip me into funding his life. Seeing that message didn't make me angry. Felt incredibly validating. It was the absolute smoking gun I had been waiting 14 years to acquire. Fueled by a profound sense of long overdue justice, I decided it was finally time to take matters completely into my own hands. My parents refused to tell the truth to the family? Fine. I would do the honors myself. I was going to burn their carefully constructed fake reality straight to the ground. I opened my laptop and logged into my personal email account. I created a new draft and began adding recipients to the BCC line. I added Aunt Beatrice. I added Uncle Robert. I added my cousins, my parents' old neighbors, and the prominent members of the church congregation my mother so desperately tried to impress. I compiled a massive contact list of every single person who had ever looked at me with disgust based on Julian's vicious lies. The subject line was simple and direct: the truth about the golden child. In the body of the email, I did not hold back a single detail. I wrote a clear, emotionally detached, factual account of the severe psychological abuse I endured growing up. I described the strict, oppressive environment, the blatant favoritism, and the devastating events of my sophomore year. I explained exactly how I was thrown out of my home without a winter coat or a dollar to my name. Then I attached the evidence. Attachment 1. A crystal-clear, high-resolution screenshot of Julian's text message, clearly showing his casual admission to fabricating the abuse rumors 14 years ago. Attachment 2. The public court records detailing Julian's massive, embarrassing business bankruptcy and the subsequent lawsuit filed against him by his defrauded investors. Attachment 3. The official notice of default and impending foreclosure on my parents' house, clearly showing that they had secretly drained their life savings and mortgaged their home to clean up Julian's massive legal and financial mess. I concluded the email with a single, sharp sentence. For 14 years, you all believed I was a monster. Now you know exactly who the real monsters are. Do not ever contact me again. I took a deep breath, staring at the screen for a long moment. I felt a massive, heavy weight sitting on my chest, the culmination of over a decade of repressed anger and silent suffering. I moved my cursor over the blue button. I clicked send. The fallout was absolutely biblical. It did not take days. It took mere hours for the carefully constructed facade of my parents' lives to completely detonate. My phone started blowing up with notifications. A barrage of frantic emails and text messages flooded in from relatives who were previously entirely unaware of the extreme extent of the emotional abuse and the financial ruin. Cousins reached out, profusely apologizing to me for believing the rumors and abandoning me when I was a vulnerable teenager. But the most spectacular explosion came from Aunt Beatrice, my mother's fiercely judgmental sister, who was still deeply bitter over her own messy divorce and custody battles. Absolutely lost her mind. She replied all to the massive email chain, publicly eviscerating my parents. She screamed at my mother in all capital letters, furious that they had been secretly living in severe debt while constantly judging everyone else's financial choices at Thanksgiving dinners. She called Julian a sociopathic parasite. The entire extended family turned on my parents instantly, tearing them apart in a vicious, public digital arena. My parents and Julian, realizing that their absolute worst nightmare had just come true, that their pristine public reputation was permanently, irreparably destroyed, began frantically trying to call me. When I immediately blocked their phone numbers, they resorted to leaving deeply unhinged, screaming voicemails from burner phones, threatening me with violence, demanding I retract the email, and cursing the day I was born. They were completely spiraling into the dark abyss they had dug for themselves, and I was standing safely at the top of the cliff, watching them fall. The barrage of desperate, abusive messages from my parents and Julian continued relentlessly for 3 days. They realized that the foreclosure process was aggressively moving forward and that they had entirely lost the support of our extended family. In their absolute desperation, their threats became increasingly erratic and borderline violent. Julian left a voicemail heavily implying he would show up at my corporate office and physically assault me. That was the absolute final straw. I was not going to allow their toxic chaos to infect the peaceful, stable life I had worked so incredibly hard to build. I scheduled an urgent meeting with Sarah, my firm's brilliant, ruthless lead corporate lawyer, who also happened to be a close personal friend and an incredibly supportive ally. Sitting in her sleek, glass-walled office overlooking the city skyline, I played the threatening voicemails for her and slid a printed copy of Julian's text message across her desk. Sarah listened carefully, her expression hardening into a mask of pure, professional fury. They are completely delusional if they think they can intimidate you. Ethan, Sarah said, typing rapidly on her keyboard. I am going to draft a comprehensive cease and desist order right now. It will explicitly warn them to never attempt to contact you by phone, email, or in person. It will also explicitly state that any attempt to approach your personal residence or corporate headquarters will result in immediate police intervention, a massive restraining order, and a highly publicized harassment lawsuit that will ruin whatever tiny shred of dignity they have left. Make it as legally terrifying as humanly possible, Sarah, I replied, feeling a profound sense of relief washing over my tired shoulders. I want the absolute maximum legal boundaries firmly established. This is the funeral of our relationship. I want the coffin nailed shut. Sarah had the legal documents served to my parents' soon-to-be-foreclosed house via a uniformed process server the very next morning. The legal threat was severe, unambiguous, and backed by the massive financial resources of my corporation. Finally scared them straight. The harassing phone calls stopped instantly. The abusive emails completely ceased. They finally realized that they had absolutely zero power, zero leverage, and zero control over my life. 2 months have passed since that incredible, chaotic week. I am incredibly happy to report that the silence from my biological family has been absolute and beautifully permanent. I took a much-needed, 3-week sabbatical from my CEO duties to focus entirely on healing and resetting my nervous system. I started attending intensive therapy sessions twice a week to finally process the deep, lingering trauma of my childhood abandonment. Unpacking 14 years of severe psychological abuse is incredibly exhausting work, but for the first time in my life, I am not running away from the pain. I am facing it head-on, completely dismantling the toxic beliefs my parents brutally forced upon me. Yesterday afternoon, I drove out to the quiet, picturesque suburbs to visit Grandma Eleanor. The massive cottage I bought for her sits on 2 acres of beautifully manicured land, surrounded by towering oak trees and vibrant flower beds. I found her kneeling in her sprawling garden, wearing a wide-brimmed straw hat and thick gardening gloves, carefully pruning a large bush of blooming hydrangeas. Even in her late 80s, she was sharp, fiercely independent, and overflowing with a genuine, unconditional love that my parents were entirely incapable of providing. I sat down on a rustic wooden bench next to her, sipping a cup of hot chamomile tea, watching the afternoon sun filter through the green leaves. They officially lost the house yesterday, Grandma, I told her quietly, staring down at my tea. The foreclosure went through. The sheriff locked them out. I heard through Aunt Beatrice that they had to move into a tiny, cramped apartment on the bad side of town. Julian is apparently sleeping on their lumpy sofa, still unemployed. Grandma Eleanor stopped pruning. She slowly pulled off her gardening gloves, walked over, and sat down heavily beside me on the bench. She reached out and placed her warm, wrinkled hand firmly over mine, squeezing tightly. Do not carry a single ounce of guilt for their misery, Ethan, she said, her voice strong and completely unwavering. You did not destroy them. Their own blinding arrogance, their vicious cruelty, and their massive greed destroyed them. The universe simply handed them the exact bill for the incredible pain they caused you. You survived the brutal winter they forced you into, and now you have built a beautiful life in the sun. That is your ultimate revenge. Living a good, honorable life. I looked at her, feeling a massive wave of profound gratitude welling up in my chest. She was absolutely right. I was no longer the terrified, abandoned 14-year-old boy desperately clinging to his father's leg in the freezing snow. I was a strong, successful, deeply resilient man who had built a massive empire from the broken pieces of his childhood. I had established ironclad boundaries, protected my profound peace, and surrounded myself with people who genuinely valued my presence. Family is absolutely not defined by shared DNA or biological obligation. Family is defined by consistent loyalty, unwavering respect, and the people who firmly choose to stand by your side when the absolute worst storms of life threaten to wash you away. I lost my parents and my brother, but I gained my absolute freedom, my self-worth, and a future entirely dictated by my own incredible strength. Have you ever faced something incredibly similar with your own toxic family members? Have you ever had to establish firm, painful boundaries to protect your own peace? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey.